Okay, I apologize for the delay. I'm having some trouble doing this thing. Okay, I apologize for the delay. I'm having some trouble doing this thing. I really don't know what's going on. Hold on. Okay, I think we are good now. So first things first, let's make sure you have taken attendance. So those are the attendance codes for today. Okay, so if you are taking this class in seat from here, then the attendance passcode is the attendance passcode is W64K, and that's a 0. If you are taking this class online, then the attendance passcode is LNPSRX. Where's my marker? What's going on? If you are taking this class from Zoom, I will need you to mute your microphone unless you are speaking, so that there is no background noise from the background.
Dr. Ram,
Yeah.
can you go back to the attendance code?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
The attendance code is not working for me.
Yes, no.
Yeah, it's not working for me either.
We'll have the same problem.
Okay. Let me look it up again, just to be sure. Let's do this. Oh. Okay, so, oh, sorry, it looks like I made a mistake. Okay, so if you are taking this course online, if you are taking this course in person, it is VV, as in two V's, VV64K0. Have you tried it?
Yep, that works.
Okay. Does it work for the rest of you? It's VV64K0. Okay. And then if you are taking this course from online, let me find it. Let me find the. It would be. That first letter might be a uppercase I. So let's try uppercase I, uppercase I N P S R X. Okay, does that work for those of you who are taking the class from Zoom? Uppercase I N P R, the uppercase I. Okay, does uppercase I N P S R X work for those of you in Zoom land?
It's still not working for me.
Oh no.
Yeah, it's not working for me either.
Very strange. Let me. What could that be? What about just try lowercase l? I mean, instead of, so you'll be L N P S R X. Does lowercase l work? Okay, so it works. Okay, thank you. Sorry for the oh my gosh. Okay, is lowercase, let me repeat the password again. Is lowercase L N P S R X. Okay, so in the interest of getting started, I'm just going to get started. If you still have difficulties in password with the password, I will try to help you going after the end of class. Jacob, right? Do you think you could? Can you help me to keep an eye on the screen in case we have questions from people out in Zoom land? Okay, thank you. Okay, so yeah. Wait, actually, before we start, I should also say something in case you didn't get my email from yesterday. So yesterday I sent out an email about the writing assignment, in class writing assignment for next week. So as you hopefully remember, next Tuesday we're going to have in class writing assignment 1 in class. If you are taking this class from Zoom, you can also complete the assignment from Zoom as well. You can just be sure to turn on your camera so I can proctor you, and you will just email me the response after you're done. So there are 4 questions altogether. So please take the next few days to prepare a response to your 4 questions, to these 4 questions. And then when you come to class to write out the responses, it will be closed book. You're not allowed to refer to any sources. I think I got a question yesterday or email that I didn't quite respond to. Got a question from Kaylin. I'm trying to learn people's names. Is Kaylin in class today? Okay, that's you. Okay, good. So I guess if I remember correctly, I mean, I think it's okay to share your question with everybody because it's of general interest. Your question was something like, how long should a response be, right?
I was kind of asking about like
don't know if you want us to like follow a specific format, like with, you know, a point evidence analysis type of format or something like that.
Oh, wasn't okay. I think that, you know, I don't really have a particular format in mind. But what happens is that with at least a couple of those questions, they, you know, the answers to those questions can be found in the notes that I posted on Moodle. And in the notes that I posted on Moodle, I have presented the questions in point form. I mean, the answers. Yeah, I've presented arguments in point form. So if you want to, you know, if you want to write out the answers to those questions in point form, yeah, in point form, in the, you know, is in that sort of point argument, the premise and conclusion form. If you want to write it out in that form, that's fine. Actually, if you can, you know, if you are somehow able to memorize everything that's in there word for word, that's fine too. Because, you know, having a good memory is not a crime. So yeah. Otherwise, you know, I would say the length doesn't have to be too long. Probably because you know, each question is about 5 points. So the question, it doesn't have to be too long. Probably about, I would say probably about slightly less than half a page for one answer, for each answer should be very sufficient. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, so let's get started. So for this week, actually for this week and the next, we are going to be talking about philosophy of religion. So what happened was last week we started by talking about the difference between philosophy and religion, and today we are going to go into talking about just focusing on philosophy of religion. So philosophy of religion, at least in Western philosophy, philosophy of religion is concerned with mainly with one question, which is the existence of God. Okay, so for this week, we are going to look at 3 arguments. We are going to look at 3 different arguments for the existence of God. And then next week we will spend some time looking at what we call the problem of evil. Many of you may already be familiar with the problem of evil. The problem of evil is basically the problem of, you know, how can there, if God is all powerful and all knowing and morally perfect, how can evil exist in the world? So that's the problem of evil in a nutshell. But that's for next week. So for this week, we are going to focus on, you know, as I said, on 3 arguments. So the first argument is the ontological argument. And the second is the cosmological argument. And the third is the teleological argument, which is also sometimes known as the argument from design. Okay, so that's basically the review of what's going to happen this week. Okay, so I decided to start by talking about philosophy of religion because I think that philosophy of religion is most people, for most people, philosophy of religion is like their first encounter with philosophy. You know, even if you are not particularly interested in philosophy, you probably have gotten into maybe 1 or 2 discussions with people about whether God exists. You probably, you know, hopefully maybe at some point you probably have wondered whether you know, whether there is some creator or somebody that has you know, made the world exist. So because of this, I decided to start with philosophy of religion because it is something that I think most people have some exposure to. Okay, so what I'm going to do for right now is to go I'll probably I'm very sure I'll go over the ontological argument today. Maybe I'll go over the cosmological argument, and perhaps on Thursday we'll get through the teleological argument. Okay, so let's start from the ontological argument. So the ontological argument, it comes from, the part of the word ontological is ontos. So ontos is a Greek word meaning something like being or existence. So very simply, the ontological argument is basically says that God is a very special kind of being. He's a very special kind of being because you can't even think about God without having to agree that God exists. Okay, why is that? Okay, I'm gonna read something from here in a little bit, but before I want to take a picture of this first because I need to remember what's going on. Okay, so right, so the ontological argument, the idea is that God exists. You can't even really think properly about God without agreeing that God has to exist. Okay, so there are two people. There are a number of people, not just two. Over the course of history, there are a number of philosophers who support the ontological argument. But for the purposes of this class, we are going to look at just one or two people. And one of the main proponents of the ontological argument is Saint Anselm. The other one is the French philosopher and mathematician René Descartes. Okay, let's start by looking at Saint Anselm's argument. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by reading a little bit from Saint Anselm, and then we'll try to make sense of what he's saying. Okay, so let me find the exact page number. Okay, if you have the textbook, please turn to page 131 of the textbook. Okay. Okay, this is the ontological argument. By Saint Anselm. Okay, so on page 131, near the bottom, in the bottom half of page 131. Okay, I'm just going to read first, and then we'll try to unpack it. God truly is. And so, O Lord, since thou givest understanding to faith, give me to understanding, as far as thou knowest it to be good for me, that thou dost exist as we believe, and that thou art what we believe thee to be. Okay. Now we believe that thou art a being than which none greater can be thought. Okay, let's pause here for a second. So the first thing that Saint Anselm does is to define God. So what is God? God is, according to him, is a being. God is a being than which none greater can be thought. Okay. In more modern language, we might say that God is the greatest conceivable being. Same thing. Okay. Going on. Or can it be that there is no such being, since the fool has said in his heart, there is no God? But when this same fool hears what I'm saying, a being than which none greater can be thought, he understands what he hears, and what he hears is in his understanding, even if he does not understand that it exists. For it is one thing for an object to be in the understanding, and another thing to understand that it exists. Okay, let's pause here for a second. There is a, he calls him the fool. He doesn't quite mean by fool, he doesn't quite mean that, he's not really talking about somebody that's stupid. What he really means is the unbeliever. So the unbeliever, right? The unbeliever says God does not exist. But when the unbeliever, when he says that God does not exist, what he's saying is something like this. What he's saying is, I understand. He's saying that I understand what God is. I understand what God is, but God does not exist. Okay, so keep this in mind. So he's saying that I understand what God is, right? God is a being than which none greater can be thought, but God does not exist. Okay, so I know this is slow and painful, but sometimes we need to go slow. Moving on. When a painter conceives beforehand what he's going to paint, he has it in his understanding, but he does not suppose that what he has not painted already exists. But when he has painted it, he has it both in his understanding and understands that what he has now produced exists. So you might wonder why is he talking about paintings now? I'm just gonna say one thing here. The idea he's trying to say is that something, in this case a painting, something. Okay, so think about painting, right? When I suppose I'm thinking of painting a painting, but I haven't painted it, and then I go on to paint the painting. Is the painting that is only in my head greater, or is the painting that exists after I painted it greater? Which one is greater? The painting that exists only in my head, or the painting that exists after I painted it? Let's try. Kelly, what do you think? Yeah, Saint Anselm would agree with you. He would say that the one that exists is greater because after I painted the painting, it now exists both in reality and in my head. Whereas before I painted it, it was only in my head. So the idea is that if it exists both in reality and in the understanding, then it's greater than if it only exists in my head.
I would say the one your head is greater because, like, when you're painting, you can make mistakes or something like you just think it's so perfect, but when it actually is there, it might not be as great. And you can make up stuff that is greater than what actually exists.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. And I think you are in good company. A lot of people disagree with Saint Anselm on that point, because the idea is that if a painting hasn't been painted yet, then it has all these different. It has so much more potential, right, to be this way or that. Whereas once you paint it and put it out there, then it's kind of fixed in that form. Okay, so and as I said, I think you are in good company. However, Saint Anselm belongs to, well, he was doing his work. He was writing all this stuff in the 11th, 12th century, I think. So in the 12th century, people had this idea that things that exist out there in the world are more real are more real or are more real and greater than things that exist only in the head. And it's okay with you. It's okay for you to disagree with St. Anselm. But the one thing he's trying to get us to agree to is this, which is that something that exists both in reality and in the understanding is greater than something. It's greater than something that exists only in the understanding. Okay. I see that I'm running out of space. Okay. So how much more do I have to go? Okay. So you might disagree with this, but he's trying to kind of get you to agree with this. So he says, okay, so let's come back to the fool or the unbeliever. So carrying on, even the fool must be convinced that a thing that which none greater can be thought exists at least in his understanding, since when he hears this, he understands it, and whatever is understood is in the understanding. But clearly, that than which a greater cannot be thought cannot exist in the understanding alone. For if it is actually in the understanding alone, it can be thought of as existing also in reality, and this is greater. Therefore, if that than which a greater cannot be thought is in the understanding alone, then this same thing than which a greater cannot be thought is that than which a greater can be thought. But this is impossible. Okay. So the idea is something like this. The idea is that if you think that okay, so if you accept that something that exists both in reality and in the understanding is greater than something that exists only in the understanding, then can you actually say that God exists only in the understanding? According to St. Anselm, the answer is no. Why? Because if you go back to number one, right? If you believe that God is a being than which none greater can be thought, okay. Suppose I say, look, I agree with number one. I believe that God is the greatest possible conceivable being. But then I also say that I think God actually doesn't exist in reality. He only exists in the understanding. I think if I say that, I'll be contradicting myself, because if God exists only in the understanding, right? Anything that exists only in the understanding cannot be the greatest possible being. Why? Because if something exists only in the understanding, there is at least one thing that is greater than it, which is the thing that exists both in the understanding and in reality. So if God, in order for God to be the greatest possible being, he cannot exist only in the understanding. He's got to exist both in the understanding and in reality. So if God exists both in the understanding and in reality, then God isn't just something that exists in the understanding. God really exists. God actually exists. So the fool is wrong. The unbeliever is wrong. The unbeliever is wrong because he has committed a basic mistake. His mistake is that is in thinking that God is the greatest possible being, and yet still thinking that God can exist only in the understanding. And that is a mistake, because if something is the greatest possible being, it's got to exist both in the understanding and in reality. So conclusion, very simple. The conclusion is that the fool is wrong, and God, in order to be God, he has to exist both in the understanding and in reality. Okay, now I'm just repeating myself, but this is important. So the general idea of all this is that if you accept 1 and 4, if you accept that God is a being than which none greater can be thought, and you also accept that things that exist both in the understanding and in reality are greater than things that exist only in the understanding alone, then you will have to accept that God cannot exist only in the understanding. He's got to exist both in the understanding and in reality, which means that God has to exist. So, so according to all this, it will be a mistake. It will be a mistake to think of God. It will be a mistake to even think about God without acknowledging, without thinking that He exists in reality. Okay, very simple. It's actually a very simple argument. God has to exist, period. Okay. So hey, what is your name again? I forget. Bracken. Okay, I think Bracken brings up a very good point, which is that you don't have to accept, you don't have to accept number 4. You don't have to accept that things that exist both in reality and in understanding are greater than things that exist only in understanding. Okay, yes. So if you don't accept that, then you can basically stop this argument and say, look, God doesn't have to exist because hold on a second. Actually, this is more interesting than I expected. If you don't accept number 4, actually, if you don't accept number 4, you can still kind of accept that God exists, right? Because you can still accept that God exists. He's still the greatest possible being. It's just that he only exists in the understanding and not in both the understanding and the reality. It just sounds a bit odd. I guess it just sounds a bit odd to say that there is a being that can exist both in the understanding. Sorry, let me try this again. It's a bit odd to say that there's a being that can exist only in the understanding, but still be the greatest possible conceivable being. Hold on a second. It looks like somebody has a question on Zoom. Oh, okay. Never mind. Those are questions about the password. Yeah, isn't it a bit odd? Isn't it? I mean, if you don't accept if you don't accept that, if you accept that something doesn't have to exist both in the understanding and in reality to be the greatest being, isn't it a bit strange to say that God exists only in the understanding, but is still the greatest possible being? Thomas.
I don't know. It seems really conceited. It's like someone made a imaginary friend that was so powerful and made any kind of logical fallacy who said that he wasn't the most powerful imaginary friend. Yeah. There's something very strange about this argument. It's like you invent something, in this case God, and then you kind of come out with this. You kind of come out with this kind of cute argument to make it so that he exists. And some people have pointed this out too. And the reason why it's such a, it's a cute argument, and it's so cute. It's so cute that you can actually put almost anything you want here. For example, right? If instead of God, let's say you put. So God is the being than which none greater can be thought, which is basically saying that God is the greatest thing ever. But if instead of greatest, you say something like, you change let's say suppose you say the Green Goblin. You say the Green Goblin is the being than which none greener can be thought. Okay. So you can actually prove the existence of a Green Goblin in this way, right? You go down the same thing, right? There's the unbeliever of the Green Goblin who says that the Green Goblin does not exist because the Green Goblin only exists in the understanding. And then you accept number 4, you say that, well, something that exists both in the reality and understanding is greater than something that exists only in the understanding. So now, now you ask a question: is the green goblin that exists is the green goblin that exists both in the understanding and in reality greater than the green goblin that exists only in the understanding? Well, if you accept number 4, then the answer is the green goblin that exists both in the reality and the understanding is greater than the green goblin that exists only in understanding. Therefore, the green goblin has to exist in both the understanding and in the reality. Therefore, green goblin exists. So there's something weird. There's something weird going on with this argument because it looks like you can use it. I mean, you just take anything you take basically anything you like and just call it the thing that which none greener or none pinker or none whatever can be thought, and then you can prove the existence of that thing. So yeah, there is something really weird. I mean, yeah, weird going on here. So so this one of the one criticism that people have put against this argument is that, well, this argument only really works. It only really works if you really believe that God exists. And because if you really believe that God exists, then you basically just use this argument to show other people why you might think that God exists. But it probably wouldn't be very successful in convincing somebody who doesn't believe in God that God exists. Because if you take some time to look at it, as you just did, you will see that there's a kind of it's just kind of a cute logical trick. Okay, so let's see. Any thoughts from those of you guys out there in the world of Zoom? No. Okay. Okay. Well, it looks like I mean, I don't know what else to say about this. I mean, even though it's a cute logical trick, it does have a certain interesting feature about it. And the feature is that, it tries to, what Senenxiong is trying to do is, he's trying to make the unbeliever look bad. Why? Because, right, again, if you believe that God is the being than which none greater can be thought, right? If you believe that God is the greatest possible being, and then you also believe that something that exists in reality and understanding is greater than something that exists only in understanding, then you basically, then if you say that God exists only in understanding, you're basically saying that God is both the being than which none greater can be thought, and also at the same time the being than which something greater can be thought, because he exists only in understanding. So so if you believe both these two things at the same time, right? If you believe both that he is a being than which none greater can be thought, and you also at the same time believe that he is a being than which something greater can be thought, then you are believing a contradiction, right? You are believing one thing and its opposite at the same time. So he's trying to make a fool look bad by making him look like somebody who believes in a contradiction. So he said at some point that, if you believe these two things at the same time, then it's absurd. Nobody in his right mind could believe these two things at the same time. So the form of this argument, there's a name for this particular argument form. The general form of this argument is called a reductio ad absurdum. So the strategy is basically to make your opponent, make somebody who disagrees with you look absurd, by reducing his beliefs to a contradiction. So he's being reduced to believing in an absurdity. hence reductio ad absurdum. Okay, let's pause for a second. Maybe you can take a moment to collect your thoughts while I take another picture. Okay, yes.
I was wondering if you could kind of explain in the book the picture with the Pegasus and like the caption and how he's using that argument.
Okay, so Senensium argues that while it is in its power to imagine or not imagine a winged horse, such as Pegasus, it is not in its power to imagine God without existence. Okay, good point. Okay, so let's start by talking about a winged horse. Okay, for the sake of, for the purpose of whatever I'm about to say, let's just assume that everything that he said just now is correct. You might not agree with him. You might still think it's a cheap logical trick, but let's just assume that he's, that everything he said is correct. So if everything he said is correct, then the idea is that God has to exist. Right? It is impossible. In other words, it is impossible to think of God without thinking of Him as existing. Okay, but Pegasus, it is power to imagine or not imagine a winged horse. So Pegasus, the Pegasus is different. Pegasus does not have to exist. Pegasus does not have to, you can, well, two things. First thing is that I don't even have to think of Pegasus at all. I may have come from a culture in which there are no stories about winged horses or Pegasus. So it's possible for me to spend my entire life without thinking of Pegasus at all. And even if I do think about Pegasus, it is possible to think of Pegasus it is actually possible to think of Pegasus without thinking of him, of Pegasus as existing. Let me just write this out. So it is possible to think of Pegasus without thinking of Pegasus as existing. Right, if you don't catch this, try thinking of other fictional objects like Harry Potter, right? I can think of Harry Potter without thinking of Harry Potter as existing. I mean, he exists in that fictional universe, but he does not exist in reality. In the same way, Pegasus might exist in some story, but he does not exist in reality. Whereas with God, it is impossible, according to everything that we just talked about, it is impossible to even think of God without thinking of God as existing. So that, in a nutshell, that is supposed to be the difference between Pegasus and God. When I think of Pegasus, it is possible for me to think of Pegasus as not existing. Whereas when I think of God, it is not possible for me to think of God as not existing. God has to exist. I'll just check in the screen. What do you guys think? Okay, if you don't know what to think, let me maybe ask you a question. So God, according to Zen and Selm, right? God has to exist, and he has to exist. He has to exist in reality. But what does it mean? I mean, what does it mean for God to exist in reality? This water bottle exists in reality. I mean, right? Because you can see, you can touch it, and all that. But what does it mean for God to exist in reality? I mean, God, well, it's not like you can see God or touch God or whatever. So what does it mean for God to exist in reality? Jacob.
If what he's saying is God is greater than something that can be thought, then if you can understand him and your understanding, but he's something greater than can be thought, isn't that a contradiction?
Sorry, I'm trying to process this. If God is greater than anything you can think of, is that a contradiction? Well, I can say the answer is no, right? Because, so it may be that I can, that my mind is limited. I can think of all kinds of things, right? But there are certain things that I'm unable to think about because my mind is limited. So it may be that perhaps God cannot be, but perhaps God is greater than whatever I can think about, because God exists beyond the limits of my mind, something like that. What does it mean for something to exist outside the limits of my mind? Let's think about something. I don't know. I mean, let's think about something that exists. Let's think about something that exists outside the limits of my mind. A round square. I understand that a few semesters ago, I had a student who actually Googled round square, and something actually came up. But I would say that the thing that came up is not the square. It's like this four-sided object with kind of curvish or roundish edges. So it's not so I would say that it's not a square. So but if you want to have something that both have 490 degrees, 4 right angles, and still is a circle, and still is round, I don't think that's possible. So a round square. Okay, so what is a round square? So what that means, right? What that means is that a round square is either totally nonsensical, it's either it's logically impossible to have a round square, or maybe there is some weird alien civilization out there that has succeeded in creating round squares, and it's beyond my mind to understand, to make sense of a round square. So it's possible, right? It's possible that God maybe is like that kind of round square. Maybe God is something that is, how do I say this? Is so great that it is beyond the limits of my understanding.
So are you kind of saying that, like, there's all this reality, but we can only perceive this much reality, so we can still exist in reality, but we can't perceive that part of reality. Is that kind of what you're saying? Like the aliens could make the round square in this part of reality, which we can't see, but it's still reality.
Could be. Yeah. Yeah, could be. It's just that, once, once you get into that, once I say yes to that, then, then, how do I say this? Okay, so if I admit to you that there is that big chunk of reality that I don't understand, it's very difficult to say this without trying to speculate about what that big chunk of reality is, right? Because it's just human nature. It's human nature to whenever there is something out there that you don't understand, you have to. There's part of your mind that has to speculate about what that chunk is. Should I do that? What if somebody were to say, look, maybe what's going on is something like this. Maybe God, right? In physics, right? In physics, say, that if you do theoretical physics, and this is a little bit out of my element here, so there's a bit of speculation going on. In theoretical physics, they say that there's more than 3 dimensions. So it's possible for there to be a 4th, 5th, 6th, and maybe 10th dimension. I have no idea what the 10th dimension is, but it could be, right, that I'm a being. As a being of 3 dimensions, I cannot really understand anything that is 4th dimension or beyond. And maybe God, whatever he is, maybe God is the being that is somehow able to understand all 10 dimensions. He is able to operate in all 10 dimensions. So God is like a multi-dimensional being. The problem is that once I say this, then then I'm already I'm already telling you what God is, right? God is a multi-dimensional being. He has 10 dimensions. I only have 3. So the moment I say this, there's a sense in which I've already put God within the limits of the understanding of physics. And why is that a problem? Well, it kind of is a problem because the whole point, I take it that the whole point of of believing in God is to believe that God is all powerful. So if God is a being that operates in 10 dimensions, then that means that there is a limit to what God can do. He cannot operate in the 11th dimension because there is no 11th dimension. So it's there's a sort of weird paradox here, because I want to say that there's a huge chunk of reality in which God operates in that is beyond me. But once I start trying to speculate about what that huge chunk of reality might be, then I start to put certain limits on God's ability, on God's ability, power. But okay, let me try to steer. How do I say this? Let me try to steer this discussion in a slightly different direction. So I said earlier, right, that this water bottle is it is real. It exists in reality because you can see it and touch it and all that. how do you make sense? I mean, how do you make sense of the idea that God exists in reality if you can't touch him or see him? Thomas?
It's really not an answer. Sorry, Doc. Just the devotion, maybe?
Oh, devotion. Okay. Yeah, devotion. Some people say love. Yeah. Okay. So, well, you know, sometimes you hear people say things like God is love, God is devotion, something like that. I sometimes wonder. I wonder that when people say this, I wonder if they start to, it starts to sound like God isn't really a person, but he's more like a, you know, like a quality. So all of us are okay. So maybe all of us are can be kind of godlike in the sense that we all have love. I mean, we all are capable of feeling love, but maybe God is maybe God is perfect because because God's love is perfect. I suddenly realized that I don't really understand what that means actually, because so there's this idea. Okay, this is I'm going to warn you that this is a little bit of a digression, but it's a useful, interesting philosophical exercise anyway. So it's worth going on this digression. What does it mean? You know, when people say that God's love is perfect, whereas my love is not, what does that actually even mean? Okay, what does it mean?
It means that probably more like God embodies the concept of love while we don't. We just understand it.
Right. But I love my parents. At least I think I do. I love my parents. So, I mean, doesn't that mean that I do embody love?
Well, this is a bit of a digression, but there was a philosophical thing I learned interesting on, like, what truly is love. If love is biased, and that your love towards a person means you love them more than anything else. Isn't love supposed to be love for everything instead of you're biased towards somebody specific?
Yeah. So love is bias, and by bias we mean that maybe by bias we mean that it is directly specific towards one individual. Like I love my parents, and maybe somebody loves his wife. So it is directed towards one or several individuals. Okay. So in that sense, right? So in that sense, maybe somebody might say, look, most of the love in this world is imperfect because it's biased, because it's directed towards one person or maybe a few, just a small group of people. Whereas the love that you might find in God is perfect because because God's love is directed towards all creation, everybody, everything. Well, God has a big heart. That's wonderful. Kelly?
Just to add on to that, like in addition to God's love being supposedly like all encompassing, I also feel like it has to do with his love being like unconditional, whereas I feel like humans love conditionally. And even if we say like I love you unconditionally, I feel like that can be altered at any point in time. Whereas the love that God is supposed to entail has to be unconditional towards everybody.
Okay, so it is. So godly love is all encompassing, and it is unconditional, right? So unconditional. Let's talk more of this. So when you say that love is unconditional, can you tell me more about what that means?
I think it's like, because kind of what I was saying is like, I feel like human love, like our love towards one another, it can be altered at any point in time, like based on circumstances, like our feelings towards somebody could change really quickly if they do something that it like wrongs us, you know, but I think that the whole idea behind godly love and why people are religious is because even if they do make mistakes, even if they do mess up sometimes in life, God will always be there to love them, where people won't necessarily always be there to love you if you mess up, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah. So the idea is that, you know, it is unconditional because it is not dependent on people being a certain way, right? Yeah. If you love your wife or husband, you might not love him if he suddenly becomes a different person. If he suddenly becomes this horrible person, you might not love him anymore. I mean, even, you know, I don't know. I mean, one could argue, right, that even parents' love for their children is not fully unconditional. So God's love, on the other hand, right, is that God's love is something that will always be there. It never changes, no matter who you become, or no matter who you become. Interesting. It almost, I mean, maybe this is obvious, but it almost seems like we are talking about two very different kinds of love. It almost seems like sometimes I feel that these two things are this godly love and this, I'm going to call it human love. It almost feels like godly love and human love are so different that sometimes I wonder if there are two different emotions. Because, I mean, if you are able to have that kind of unconditional good feeling towards somebody, no matter who they become or no matter what changes, it almost feels like it is not the same feeling anymore. Because if you think about all the kinds of conditional loves there are in this world, right? The love that you have for your wife or husband or boyfriend or girlfriend. The thing about that kind of love, right, is that the reason why it changes when over time is because it was only supposed to be there for a particular reason, and it's only supposed to be there for a particular reason and be there for particular, in a particular kind of situation. To make a long story short, it's only supposed to be there for romantic purposes, more or less. Whereas God's love, whatever you want to call it, or whatever name you want to call it, is not there for romantic purposes. It is there for all purposes. So if you have one feeling which is there only for romantic purposes, and you have another feeling which is there for all purposes, like they speak of, there's all-weather tire, and now there's all-weather love. Okay, so if there is a love that is there for all purposes, a feeling that is there for all purposes compared to a feeling that is there for only one purpose, sometimes I wonder, it almost seems like there are two different kinds of feelings. You might remember, right? You might remember that earlier in the semester, last week actually, I made that embarrassing thing in class where I couldn't remember all the different terms that the Greeks had for love. But you can, if you come back to that, right? This godly love, the Greeks, I think the Greeks call it agape, and this, this kind of romantic love that has a sexual component, the Greeks call it eros. And I don't think the Greeks had So in our case, we call it both love, right? But in the case of the Greeks, I don't think they know, they call it, notice that they call it by two totally different names, agape and eros. And I think the reason why they call it by two different names is because they think that those two are two totally different feelings. Just like, anger is different from love, right? So in the same way, they also think that just as anger is different from love, eros is different from agape. Okay. So this is okay. This is, as I said, this is a digression. But we started on this route because we were talking about the idea that perhaps God is not really God is not really a person. Maybe he's a quality. Maybe he is the maybe he is a maybe he's a quality. Maybe he's a love, and maybe he is he's a different kind of love from the kind of love that all of us have. Okay, so I don't think it's possible. I don't think it's. Tell me. I mean, you can disagree. You can disagree with me. I'm just musing aloud right now. I don't think it's possible for any human to love unconditionally. Do you think? Do you think so?
I think yes, but not like an ideal unconditional. Like it'll change. You'll still love them, but almost in different ways depending on the condition. So it's unconditionally, overall going to be love, but your kind of relationship will change. You'll still love them, but you'll have a different relationship. That's what I'm thinking. So you can, but not
changes and maybe evolves.
Yeah.
So when it changes and evolves, is this a sign that I'm running out of time? Okay, so so when it changes and evolves, when it changes and evolves, does the end product, does the thing that it changed and evolved to at the end, is that somehow a better thing than the thing that was there at the beginning? Yeah, I don't know either, but some years ago, I don't know if this actually, this is a good story, but maybe it's not good. Some years ago, I had a friend who who decided to go to yoga class, and why did he go to yoga class? He decided to go to yoga class because because somebody told him that there are all these beautiful women in yoga class. So he should go to yoga class to increase his chances of meeting somebody he can date, right? So he went to yoga class, and then something very strange happened. So he went to yoga class, and there were indeed many beautiful women there. But then, after about 15 minutes of doing the yoga, he realized that he's much more interested in the yoga than in the women around him. And then, at the end of class, he went up to the instructor to ask him about, further readings and books that he can read about yoga. And then he did more reading and books about yoga, and then he became a yoga teacher, and then he eventually became a yoga teacher. So I don't know if this is an accurate representation of what's going on, but it's almost like he goes into a class, right? He goes into a class originally with the intention of loving a particular woman, loving a particular person, or finding a particular person to love. But then unexpectedly, he ends up loving not a particular person, but a certain thing called yoga, which is, what is yoga? Yoga is a discipline, right? It's a discipline, it's an art, whatever you call it. So it ends up loving an art instead of loving a particular person. So let me ask you a question. So is his love for the art, how do I say this? Is it a higher form of love than loving a particular person, or is it just different?
I would say it's just different because, it's a thing that can't really change, it's like a set of things you do, whereas like a person can change, you can do different things to change your perspective on things, whereas like an art, you can't really let you down or anything because it is always the same thing, consistent. Whereas being humans are not always consistent, so your love can change. So I think it's just different, not really better words.
Interesting. Yeah, so coming back to, I'm trying to link all this to our discussion about unconditional godly love versus human love. I wonder if one could say that maybe godly love is not better. Maybe it's not better than human love. It's just different. I mean, it's if God loves you, or if you love God, your love is directed towards something that that is supposedly cannot change, that supposedly doesn't change. Whereas if you love a person, your love is directed towards something that changes over time. And so just as loving a person versus loving yoga one is not better than the other, they're just different. So maybe loving God over as compared to loving a particular person, maybe it's also not different. Maybe they're just different. Okay, I'm going to try to use this. I'm going to try to pull us back towards our main discussion, which is the discussion about God. So I wonder, could it be that when people, here's one question, right? One question is, why do people, it's more of an anthropological question than a philosophical question, but the question is, why do people need to believe in something like God anyway? And maybe the answer is that the belief in God fulfills a certain need that people have for unconditional love, because loving God is in a sense more stable. Loving God and believing in God is more stable than loving people and believing in people. Because people, if you love people and believe in people, then people can change, and then you'll be disappointed. Whereas if you believe in God, then you are believing in something that doesn't change, which is, I don't know if it's better, but it is more stable. And people, perhaps, I think people choose to believe in God because they want to believe in and love something that is stable. So, as I said, this is more of an anthropological question than a real philosophical question. Okay, so I see that I have 2 minutes left. Let me use the remaining 2 minutes to get a quick start on. Remember, so so far we have looked at one of the arguments, which is the ontological argument. You might recall that there are 3 arguments altogether for the existence of God. So the second argument is the cosmological argument. Okay, I'm going to just give you the very quick Spark Notes version of the cosmological argument, and then we'll go into the longer version on Thursday. Okay, the Spark Notes version is something like this. Things exist, right, in this universe. Things exist, and well, if things exist, well, then something has to have happened. These things that exist have to be caused by something. Things have to be caused by something, by other things. But the idea is that, this, this chain of causation, so this thing is, there are things which are caused by other things, which are in turn caused by other things that came before them. So this chain of causation cannot go on forever. This chain of causation cannot go back forever. So if it cannot go back forever, then there has to be one thing. There has to be one thing which started this whole chain of causation. In other words, there has to be a first cause that started the chain of causation. Okay, to make a long story short, the first cause which started the chain of causation is God. So God has to exist because God has to be the first cause that started the whole chain of causation. Okay, so this is, as I said, this is just a Spark Notes version. Yeah, let's talk about this more on Thursday. Okay, so let's end class here. Thank you so much.